Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, a trafficking case divides one of South Africa's top political families.
A week after her own sister opened a criminal case against her for allegedly trafficking South Africans to fight for Russia in Ukraine, Duduzile Zuma-Sambudla resigned from parliament.
Why former President Jacob Zuma's daughter is accused of luring African men into fighting in the Russia-Ukraine war. I'm Malika Bilal, and this is The Take. Hey everyone, as you're watching today's show, leave us a comment telling us what you think of the conversation, and if you're in South Africa, how this news is affecting you there. If you're listening to this episode, leave us a review on your podcast app telling us where you're listening from, and if you like what you hear, feel free to rate us 5 stars. Thanks.
My name is Rachel Savage, and I am The Guardian's Southern Africa correspondent, and I'm based in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Rachel, welcome to The Take. Now, you know that our story today starts as a mystery and quickly morphs into a political thriller with a dash of family drama. And that's because last month, South African authorities revealed they were investigating how at least 17 of their nationals landed on the front lines of Russia's war in Ukraine. But the plot thickened 2 weeks ago when one of the daughters of former South African President Jacob Zuma, Duduzile Zuma-Sambudla, was accused of being behind it all. And her accuser is her half-sister. So help us unpack this. What is Duduzile actually accused of doing?
So Duduzile Zuma-Sambudla is accused of luring 17 South African men and 2 Botswana men to Russia on the pretext that they would be doing bodyguard training for the Zumas and Nkontowezizwe MK party, or some of them were told they were going there for personal development and that they would have chances to go to a Russian university and maybe even get Russian citizenship. And then actually, it turned out that after a few weeks of training, which progressed into, learning how to use a gun, these men were allegedly sent to the front line in eastern Ukraine.
And how do we know about this?
So news started coming out in South African publications that desperate relatives were sort of contacting South African publications saying that their sons who had left South Africa in July were in Ukraine, trapped there, and that they didn't want to be there on the front lines. And then, a week or so later, Duduzile's half-sister, Nkosana, filed an affidavit with police accusing her sister of trafficking these men and of breaking a South African law that forbids assisting foreign militaries. And she also accused her sister of fraud. And then the Democratic Alliance, which used to be South Africa's largest opposition party and is now the second largest party in South Africa's coalition, also filed charges against Duduzile, accusing her of recruiting men for Russia.
Oh, my goodness. Okay. Well, we know that Duduzile isn't just a person with a famous last name. She isn't just a daughter of the longtime former president, Jacob Zuma, who himself is no stranger to controversy. She was also a member, as you said, of parliament for the MK opposition party that Zuma started in 2023 after he was dramatically expelled from the then ruling ANC over misconduct allegations. Duduzile stepped down from her role last week, but she denies all wrongdoing, and she says that she was the one who was duped.
In a sworn affidavit submitted to the South African Police Service, she states that she acted in good faith and never intended to recruit anyone for combat or mercenary activity.
What more do we know about her side of the story?
So Duduzile claims that she was merely sort of passing on this opportunity for training in Russia, which she herself took up. She says that she also trained for a month in Russia, and she did sort of outdoors, trekking with heavy backpacks, that kind of thing. And, she just merely wanted to pass this opportunity on. She said she was tricked by a man called Blessing Koza into believing that, this was a legitimate training opportunity. But then, that does beg the question, training for what? Does that mean that she and the MK party were, wanting to recruit some kind of, armed bodyguards, militia for themselves? And I should say as well that the MK party have denied any involvement in this whatsoever.
8 of the men who were taken to Russia are actually Zuma family members. And SABC News spoke to Jacob Zuma's sister-in-law. Her name is Phumla Zuma, and she says she asked the former president for help.
I spoke to Baba Zuma, and he said he went to Russia but didn't meet with the Russian president. He also wrote a letter and left money so that the children could fly back home. He said he also requested that they be pulled out of the danger zones, but nothing has happened.
These men are reportedly trapped in the Donbass region of Ukraine, where there's a lot of heavy fighting. What do we know about who these men are and what they say about being duped into this war?
So the 17 South African men that are still there, as you said, reportedly 8 of them are Zuma relatives. That's what Duduzile's half-sister, Nkosazana, said in her affidavit as well, that there were 8 of her relatives trapped there. There are also 2 Botswana men as well. Originally, there were 3 more South African men, according to various reports. And one of them was reportedly Andile Mandela, one of the grandsons of the late Nelson Mandela. And I should say these are South African media reports and not ones I have myself verified. But the reports say that Andile and 2 others who also had connections or relations to the Mandela family were able to leave Russia because they were Mandelas or they were connected to the Mandelas. So we're left with, 17 South African men and 2 Botswana men. So I've spoken to one mother, and I won't sort of say who she's the mother of to protect her and her child's identity. But she said that her son was initially reluctant to go to Russia, but Duduzile then persuaded them that this was, a fantastic opportunity to go to Russia. And, she said she hasn't heard from her son since the 27th of August when, he spoke to her over one of the other men's phones to say that they thought that they were being sent to the front line, which was, not what they had been promised, not what they had been told. And now there are screenshots of sort of WhatsApp groups that have been going around, and I was shared some of these screenshots by a Democratic Alliance MP, their Chris Hatting, their spokesperson for defence. And, in these WhatsApp groups, you've got a lot of these young men saying, they're telling us we're being sent. This was not what we were promised. Can you come and get us? We're trying to refuse, but we're being accused of treason. It's really scary. These people are very serious. And, Duduzile and Blessing Koza and another woman, Sipokazi, are saying in the group, hold tight. This shouldn't be happening. We're going to sort this out. Don't worry. And then, according to the mother, she lost contact with her son. And she also told me she was then contacted by another of the men in the group in mid-November saying, we don't know where your son is, but, you should ask people where he is.
Oh, no.
And so she doesn't know where her son is. But, the people she is in touch with say that they're still in eastern Ukraine. They haven't been giving her an awful lot of details, but they say they're cold, they're scared, there's a lot of drones flying over, but they haven't been specific about whether they've been engaged in direct combat or anything like that.
Rachel, as you're talking, it dawns on me that the outside of the story looks like a perfect Netflix thriller with the family drama and the twists and turns. But at the heart of it are these men who say they are trapped, who say they are cold, who say they are scared and do not know how to fight and did not know that they were going to fight in a war between Russia and Ukraine. What was that conversation like with the mother you had? How did she sound?
Yes, it was quite a difficult conversation. She said that she was losing weight, that she was having anxiety attacks. She's sort of in and out of hospital these past few weeks, particularly since she's spoken to other men who say they're trapped in Ukraine but hasn't been able to speak to her son. So, she said she was really struggling. She sounded very tired. But she wanted to talk. She wanted to sort of, explain what was going on. She wants the story to be told, although, anonymously to protect her and her son's identities.
Well, Rachel, you have written about how Duduzile has been pretty open about her support of Russia on social media. In fact, she posted the day that Russia invaded Ukraine. It's a photo of her father and Russian President Vladimir Putin toasting each other at an event. And in the tweet, she writes, "We love you both loudly and unapologetically, so I'll drink to that." What can you tell us about the Zuma family's connections with Russia? What do we know?
So when Jacob Zuma was president, he formed some pretty close relations with Russia. He was very proud that South Africa got invited to join the BRICS bloc, so Brazil, Russia, India, and China, and then they brought in South Africa to add the S to the end of the BRICS bloc. And for Jacob Zuma, that was a real triumph. He wanted to present himself as sort of, anti-imperialist, that this was sort of a counterweight to the West. He very much presents himself as a sort of revolutionary and someone who's sort of, challenging the old world order. He also was allegedly poisoned in 2014 and went to Russia for treatment, and credits that with saving his life. And then he went back to Russia in 2023 for some more hospital treatment. We didn't know what that particular treatment was this time. So he's a regular visitor to Russia. And when he was president, he wanted to sign a nuclear deal with Russia after the poisoning incident in 2014, and that deal was allegedly corrupt and was cancelled. Although Jacob Zuma has always denied the sort of numerous corruption allegations against him over his career.
Well, Rachel, we heard earlier in the clip we played from Jacob Zuma's sister-in-law that he traveled reportedly to Russia to attempt to secure the release of these men. As far as we know, the men are not home, so that would seem like it was unsuccessful, at least as of now. Do we know anything more about that trip, about the reported attempts?
So early in October, Duduzile did message, according to the screenshots I've seen, did message a relative of one of the men allegedly stuck in Ukraine, saying, "Me and Dad are traveling to Russia. We're going to sort this out." And then after that, they didn't hear anything else from her. So, she was telling, relatives that, her and her father were going to Russia to try and, get the men out of Ukraine. That's one thing. And then secondly, a letter that is purportedly from Jacob Zuma, although his MK party have not confirmed that this letter is real, but there is a letter that has been published in South African media on MK letterhead, allegedly signed by Jacob Zuma, written to Russia's defense minister, Andrei Belosov, dated the 19th of September, saying, in, good comradely spirit, please, assist us in getting these men home. This would be, if they come to any harm, this could be bad for Russo-Africa relations. So, the reporting is that he went to Russia with Duduzile, Jacob Zuma and Duduzile together, and, tried to get a meeting with, officials and ministers in the Kremlin and was denied a meeting. That's at least what is reported.
More with Rachel after the break. Well, Rachel, these accusations are, of course, very serious, but they aren't the first that Duduzile Zuma has been faced with. So I want to turn here to what she's currently in court for. She's been in court these past few weeks on a completely different case, facing a terrorism-related charge. She's on trial for allegedly inciting the 2021 riots that killed more than 300 people in South Africa. And those erupted when her father was jailed after failing to attend a corruption inquiry, which triggered protests. What's the latest in that case? What do we know about that case?
So Duduzile used to be very active on Twitter. She had more than 200,000 followers when it was known as Twitter. Now it's obviously known as X. And she posted tweets when the riots were going on. For example, she posted a video of a truck, or what looks like a truck, on fire, saying, "We see you." There were a number of different tweets that have been involved in this court case. And she's accused of inciting violence via those posts. She denies that. So the case began earlier, in November and has been sort of going on in a court in Durban for the past few weeks. But yes, Duduzile denies all the charges in those cases.
How is all of this going down in South Africa amongst people you talk to and people you've met in the course of your reporting on this?
So, the Zumas, both Jacob and Duduzile, are polarizing figures. So, in some ways, this sort of comes on top of, already, large numbers of scandals. Many people did not like the Zumas anyway. So this would just sort of make a bad opinion of them even worse. It's too soon to tell whether this will affect wider support for the Zumas and Hunte Sizwe party. They won 14.6% of the vote in last year's national elections. But the party has been sort of beset by infighting since then. And it still kind of remains largely focused on the personality of Jacob Zuma. And meanwhile, Duduzile, was his most loyal supporter, his most vocal advocate, the one of his children who really has sort of stood by his side, all of that. But, she's never really created much of an independent political identity. She's really very much sort of campaigning for her father, for his causes, for his party. I think, she's seen in South Africa as not being as sort of clever, not being as, sort of as resourceful and as, good at getting out of trouble as her father.
Well, you mentioned that she's often seen as perhaps one of her father's loyal foot soldiers and one of his favorites. She's one of his reportedly 20 children, multiple wives. And I wonder, when did she come to the fore in the public? When did people first become aware of Duduzile?
So I think when she first really sort of catapulted to public attention or more public attention was during Jacob Zuma's trial on allegations of rape in the mid-2000s. And he was cleared of those charges. And, Duduzile defended her father. She testified that the accuser of Jacob Zuma was, out to get money and, couldn't be trusted, basically. So, she took her father's side to sort of defend him against allegations from women that he'd raped them. And, she was there, she was pictured next to him. And that's the first time she sort of really, really came to prominence.
Well, looking at videos of her walking into the courtroom, and you see this charismatic, stylish woman smiling and hugging and shaking hands with people. One of the videos I saw, she could hardly get into the doors of the courtroom because people wanted to stop her and hug her and talk to her. She's facing very serious charges, but the vibe is joyous political rally or celebrity event. So you've just laid out all of these very complicated, controversial things, but what can you tell us about her public persona? Clearly, there is still some appeal there.
Yes, I mean, the Zuma family, both Duduzile and her father most prominently, they do have a core of support, especially in KwaZulu-Natal and Durban, where, the trial on the charges of inciting the riots is going on, is the capital of KwaZulu-Natal province. So, it's not surprising that Duduzile would have sort of supporters come to court to support her. And, the riots that broke out after her father were imprisoned, the fact that the party got 14.6% of the vote, there is still kind of a core base there who idolize the Zumas, mainly her father, but, Duduzile as well. As you said, clearly people do, like and support her very much as well. And, she is charismatic. In one of her court appearances, she was wearing, a sort of a low-cut black shirt and very vertiginous high heels and a black harness. But in other appearances, she'll wear a T-shirt saying modern day terrorist. And, that references how during the apartheid era, Nelson Mandela, the ANC were, considered terrorists by, for example, Margaret Thatcher and her government in the UK. So, she's sort of harking back to the fact that, freedom fighters are, have been referred to as terrorists in South Africa, and perhaps therefore implying that, she herself, accused of terrorism, is in fact a freedom fighter.
Well, finally, Rachel, Duduzile was poised to take on her father's mantle. Jacob Zuma is 83 years old, and he's facing his own legal troubles. So when you look to the future, what does this case mean for his legacy and the future of the party that he founded and she was a part of until not too long ago?
So I think as long as Jacob Zuma is alive and still in politics, he will have a core of support. You know, he remains very popular in KwaZulu-Natal amongst a sort of core base of people. And, you know, whether his daughter commands the same level of support, I think is another question. She clearly does have her fans, but, you know, I just don't think it's to quite the same extent as of her father. The MK party is also, as I mentioned earlier, beset by a lot of infighting, and, you know, political analysts here in South Africa doubt whether it will survive intact once Jacob Zuma is no longer here. In terms of how this case affects, you know, Zuma and his legacy, I mean, his legacy is already sort of full of corruption allegations, full of, you know, the state capture era of his presidency from 2009 to 2018, you know, allegations that he ran the country into the ground, that South Africa still hasn't recovered from that. So, you know, this is just yet more sort of scandal upon scandal. You know, perhaps amongst certain communities that did support the Zumas and their political party, then, you know, who are maybe connected to the men in Ukraine, they might not vote for the MK party anymore. But, you know, the sort of broader communities, if Jacob Zuma still is there, he will get some votes at least, maybe fewer than the last election, though.
Well, Rachel, thank you so much for this conversation. So many twists and turns that the sun has set as we've been talking. So appreciate you walking us through this story.
Thank you so much. Yes, the sun has set here as we've had this very interesting conversation. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.